This is the W.T.F. Bach podcast.
Right, that work those fingers.
This is the podcast about all things Johann Sebastian Bach. Brought to you by Evan Shinners. W.T.F. Bach. Brought to you by Evan Shinners. Join W.T.F. Bach as he guides your mind through a contrapuntal journey. And now here's W.T.F. Bach.
Hey, it's W.T.F. Bach. It is Evan Shinners. You may call me either. I answer to both. The goal of this podcast is to be your guide, to lead your mind through the roads of resonance, the courses of counterpoint, the straits of stretto, aspects structural, biographical, or even hypothetical in the music of one J.S. Bach, so as to help you gain more appreciation for it. This is an interview episode. I aim to bring onto this show people who come from various backgrounds, all united around Bach, and in this first season discuss the art of fugue. My guest today is one of the most accomplished bluegrass players in the world, Thile. Thile, T-H-I-L-E, virtuoso mandolinist, and if you don't know what that is, he is going to tell you. He's a truly consummate musician, with a new album coming out on June 4th, by the way. He's a singer and a composer. He's a 2012 MacArthur Fellow. I can't even count how many here. 1, 2, 3, 4 Grammy Awards. He was even nominated for a Grammy when he was 15 years old. Best known for his work with the bands Nickle and Punch Brothers, he's played with, well, everybody. Yo-Yo Ma, Edgar Meyer, Bela Fleck, Stuart Duncan, Mark O'Connor. He has a duo record with friend of the show Brad Mehldau. He even plays on a Dolly Parton record. You should look up videos of the man playing when he was 13 years old. His command of the instrument was already immense at that age. He comes from a line of musicians, as you will hear in our interview. But why, WTF, you ask, am I interviewing a bluegrass musician on a podcast about Bach? Well, if you know anything about Mr. Thile, you also know that he plays Bach extremely well. He's recorded half of the sonatas and partitas for solo violin, and we eagerly await the second half. I first became aware of Mr. Thile's existence when I heard him playing the jig of the D minor partita in front of a jam-packed audience at a bluegrass festival. He didn't announce it or anything, he just went on in and played it and the crowd went nuts, and I thought, that's the idea, that's it. With the way that he programs Bach, I feel that he's been one of the more important Bach promoters in our generation, and recently he played the 13th contrapuntus, the second of the 2 mirror fugues in the Art of Fugue, on American Public Media on the show Live From Here. I wondered what had captured him about that specific fugue from the Art of Fugue, and so I had the privilege of interviewing him. Our interview is all over the map. We talk about baseball and drinking almost as much as we talk about Bach. I even asked Mr. Thile if he's going to hell, but not out of context, of course. It was a real pleasure interviewing him, and in the days between speaking with him and releasing this episode, one thing in particular he said has stuck with me. He spoke about the real difficult parts of Bach's music, and he posed the question, are these parts difficult, or do we just love it so much, and we want to be good for Herr Bach? Well, that question has given me pause these last few days while practicing, and I've begun looking at these difficult passages entirely differently. And I think that that is the sign of a great musician, really, to be able to say something, even off the cuff, and have it stick with another musician, and influence them and allow them to chew on that little tidbit. Maybe that's just the sign of a great mind altogether. One disclaimer. Chris and I had an awful internet connection where we had originally planned on speaking, so he had to move outside to record his end of the audio, so there is some wind in the background and some other noise, but there's some lovely bird calls too, so I beg you to be patient with the audio, and rather than regretting the lack of perfection, imagine Mr. Thile with some Nashville breeze wafting through his hair as he speaks about Bach one fine morning.
And here on this special interview episode of the WTF Bach podcast, the remark, Chris Thile is all about Chris Thile.
Chris Thile, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Evan.
First things first, you have a new album coming out on June 4th called Lay Songs. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it's the first properly solo record that I've made. I've made solo records before, but have either overdubbed myself ad nauseum or had actual collaborators, who just weren't being properly credited for their hard and skillful work. Or there was one, a Bach record, that was truly solo, but when you're playing Bach, I mean, it feels like a duet, really. You're playing the man's music, and so that actually does feel in a cheeky way like a duet record, as opposed to this where I'm really offering up things of my own writ. Also the first properly solo record with singing, and it was an opportunity for me to explore the textural possibilities of just mandolin and voice, but I also felt like I needed a unifying sort of area of thought and expression to give the thing meaning other than, I literally can't make a record with anyone else right now because of coronavirus. That's like a perfectly fine reason to make a solo record right at this moment, but hopefully it won't be a great reason to make a solo record for very long. And so I started thinking about, as I am wont to do, the sort of good and bad of organized religion as it pertains to how I conduct my communal activity. Like I was raised with a ton of religion and have completely drifted away from it, but it still impacts the way that I relate to the people around me and the world around me. And I see the religious impulse percolating in all facets of community, whether they touch actual organized religion or not. So this was a fun opportunity to use a bunch of that imagery, lyrical religious imagery, but in the service of a very sort of secular line of thinking. And then I really enjoyed how the forced solitude of making a solo record in the pandemic mimicked the way that I felt as an adolescent growing up in church and kind of surrounded by people who all seemed very, very unified in the contemplation of God, a God that I was actively questioning, against my own, kind of like against every instinct of my body. It's like I wanted to be like these people, and they seemed so sure of themselves, and I was, is this God? Is this real? Does this thing exist, and am I going to hell for doubting it, and also for noticing that the girl 2 pews over is really pretty? Just that actually, I felt so alone in the middle of a church service that it felt appropriate to make a record about all this stuff by myself.
So what is your conclusion? Are you going to hell?
Probably. Yeah. I think, I don't know. I think the conclusion for me is that, living in a self-serving way is plenty hell in and of itself. So how to go about avoiding that in this very self-oriented society of ours? How do we go about acquiring a bit of selflessness? I've never been much for music that draws conclusions. I feel like music in general is better at asking questions than it is at answering them. It's
an interesting idea, this thought of having to throw yourself onto something bigger, despite what your personal belief might be. And this is definitely tied into Bach,
Oh my God, all music is made for the glory of God.
Right, Pariah, growing up in this Sephardic Jewish household, he was the one that said in order to truly play Bach, you have to become a Christian. Is there some of that in bluegrass music too, because of the same Christian tradition?
Oh wow, absolutely. I mean you're not going to achieve a real working knowledge of that music without really diving into the extensive gospel repertoire. I mean, the whole bluegrass to me is all about bluegrass festivals, and on Sunday morning everyone does all their gospel material. That's like a tradition, and coming up in the community, you've got to have it like a festival. I mean, I suppose you don't have to. You could just say, hey, we don't have any gospel material, but then the promoter's just going to be like, what? When Bill Monroe would say, now it's time for a semi-sacred number. And the Saturday night, Sunday morning aspect of bluegrass music is so important. The kind of that however pious that Sunday morning material may be, it's not going to prevent you from absolutely burning it down 6 days later.
What happens on Saturday nights?
Oh, I mean, Saturday night is bluegrass music. There's topically speaking, cheating songs and drinking songs and murdering songs. I think there's just as much of that activity in the canon as there is spiritual activity. And so I think, even early in my life, there was a dim awareness of the inherent hypocrisy in any human superiority, any sense of human superiority. There are plenty of "Lord, forgive me for my sin" songs, but there's also a ton of like "Lord, forgive you. You're not on the right track." I mean, there's so much of that. Ask for forgiveness, sinner, and He will hear your call. Hallelujah. And then again, just burning it down the next Saturday night at the Bluegrass Festival.
This is a question I want to ask everyone who comes on the show. If you had to explain the art of fugue to a child, what would you say?
What would I say? Do you know what's funny is there was a friend of my little boy came over, and they saw that I have my wife. I mean, I think early in our relationship, bought me a little Bach action figure, and they saw this little kid saw the action figure like perched on a shelf somewhere. Who's that? In that sort of accusatory, childlike way, and I went, well, that's this guy, Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach. What did he do? And I start launching into it. Tell us the story about that guy, because they think it's a superhero, and he is. And so I started getting into it. Well, in my opinion, he's the greatest musician who ever lived. Why? Well, he had such control over the materials of music. What do you materials of music? What are you talking about? I'm going, well, I would start with counterpoint. Counterpoint? Like a line that goes against another line, and they are complementary and yet independent. And, these kids are just glazing over. And so then I switched to the story about him fighting the bassoonist, absolutely just actually fighting in the street with this bassoonist over a poor performance. I get him back. And I did actually bring up the art of the fugue as evidence of Bach's,
of his sonic superpowers.
His superpowers, his just how far he was willing to go to achieve, I don't even think mastery in his head, to just achieve a greater level of musical understanding. And I think that the art of the fugue I hold that up as maybe the greatest example of musical exploration. Certainly, the well-tempered clavier also feels. The well-tempered clavier, I think, is also great evidence of that kind of activity. But there's something so yearning, so searching. This is not a word that maybe we commonly associate with Bach, but I think in the music, there's humility to me. There's like the spirit of the student in the art of the fugue in a way that really intrigues me. Just like the premise of it, I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to manipulate it in all the ways that I can think of at this point in my musical life. And I love that it seems, particularly in the art of the fugue, like he's doing it for himself. And I think I suppose there's a way in which that seems like the epitome of self-absorbed musical activity, and there's a way in which it seems like the least self-absorbed thing you could possibly do. I think the instinct that most of us musicians have to find a thing and show it to someone as quickly as possible, to reap a little attention from the fruits of our labors. I think about that a lot while playing the solo violin music. The extent to which he meant it to be performed. How theoretical was any performance to him, of that music. And I think with the art of the fugue, even perhaps more theoretical. Just the idea that he was going to chase this, he was going to chase perfect understanding of counterpoint. I don't think he pretends that that's possible, just that it's a worthy endeavor.
Chasing something, not necessarily chasing it to a completion. And it reminds me of the canons on the back of the Goldberg variations where he writes the 14 canons.
Yeah. Yes.
And he writes at the end of these 14 canons, etc. I love that etc.
Wow.
It's like you can go on if you need more than 14 of these ideas stemming from this one bass line.
Oh, I just adore the man, as do we all.
I know you've recorded the 13th contrapuntus with Yo-Yo Ma and Edgar Meyer. I've seen you play it on public radio. Do you play the rest of the Art of the Fugue, or is this 13th contrapuntus close to your heart?
Oh, I mean, it's so... My personal Bach guru is Edgar Meyer, and I've played a few. God, what else? I
was going to ask you if you played that eighth one because it's also in three voices. So
yeah.
You played this with whom?
Again with Edgar and Yo-Yo. Yeah, it's not on the record though, right?
No, it's not.
Yeah, we recorded it and then didn't actually include it on the record. Mainly because Edgar had already recorded it with Bela, Fleck, and Mike Marshall. And that's a beautiful... I strongly encourage you to check that out. I do love playing Bach with a plectrum in the company of bowed musicians, just because I think the disparate texture illuminates that dance between just the complementary independence of those lines, and when you're playing them on different like drastically different instruments like a cello and a mandolin, the separate lives of those lines comes into clearer focus.
Well, it sounds like you're describing continuo playing, because there's the bowed instrument, of course, and then there's the plucked instrument.
Yep, and then harpsichord. I love that sound. So it's just well, it's just a joy. It's a joy to get to play it. But those are really the only things I've played. There's a four voice. I'm gonna forget the number. Is it 10? Is 10 a four voice?
10. That's 10. Everything is four voice except for the ones that you just mentioned.
Oh, okay. Well, there you have it. I think it's 10 then. That I played with Bela and so Edgar, Bela, and Mike Marshall at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival. Actually, early Sunday morning. So they let a morning of only Bach pass as a gospel set, which I think was appropriate.
That's appropriate. Tell us about this one number on that trio record, the Erbarm dich, mein o Herr Gott. I was so happy to see that on the record, but I couldn't figure it out. Are you playing guitar?
Oh, on air. No, that's and just because I'm never looking at the titles of these things, hum me a few bars.
That's the one that begins in F sharp minor. That
Oh, indeed. Oh my God, that piece just blew my mind anew. I felt like I had listened to the width and breadth of what our man had been up to, and then all of a sudden he pulls out this Radiohead shit on us that's like, I mean, also just how sneaky where that piece actually is headed. I feel like the first 10 seconds, there's an entire world in the first 10 seconds of that piece. And then he just keeps going. I'm playing guitar on it. And that's another Edgar Meyer find. I've tried to get Edgar even remotely interested in Radiohead on multiple occasions. And he just, at this point, I think it's just fun for him to keep crushing my spirit in just trying to attempt him that there's any there. Or trying to attempt to convince him that there's any there. And so then he said, I also felt that it was a subtle admission to that he does find some value in Radiohead when he sent this as a possible piece for us to play with Yo-Yo.
So let's talk about the history of the mandolin in classical music, because we've got, the famous scene in Don Giovanni. You have the original compositions by Beethoven. You have the concertos for plucked instruments by Vivaldi. Here you have Vivaldi, this great violinist who's writing concertos for the mandolin with a similar technique to the violin music. So is there already a history of playing violin music on mandolin and vice versa? Is there a tradition before you?
Well, certainly in the vernacular music that I grew up with, 90% of the language in bluegrass music, no, that's probably high, maybe 75% of the language of bluegrass music comes from British Isles fiddle tune music. And so everyone grows up learning all of those tunes and then playing them around the campfire, drunk off their gourds on Saturday night before the gospel set on Sunday morning. You gotta do something to necessitate your pleas for forgiveness the next morning, right? And so even as a little kid, now I was not drunk off my gourd as a little kid, but I was, playing fiddle tunes with people who were. And so you learn all those tunes. And so for me, when I was exposed to Bach, people were trying for a little while, but I was so obsessed with bluegrass and then I kind of started getting into jazz. Because of Bela, really, because of Bela Fleck. So then I kind of opened up the worldview to include jazz, and then ran into Edgar, Meyer, and heard. Honestly, it was Contrapunctus 8 that Edgar's recording with Bela and Mike on his record Uncommon Ritual was probably a first mover for me and Bach. Right around that same time, both my grandmas on my mother's side, there was divorce involved, and both of my grandmas, my biological grandma and my step grandma, are both very good pianists. Despite the fact that we were living in different musical worlds, they were realizing right about that point, I think, that I might have some substantial musical aptitude. And so even though maybe what I was playing sounded like hillbilly music.
What age are we talking about here?
I think they were impressed with me before 13 or 14, but I think it was around then that they started hearing the kind of facility that made more sense to them, just than like me playing, roll in my sweet baby's arms, chopping on the mandolin, roll in my, it's cute, he can play really fast, but my goodness, is that simple, primitive music. I think to my grandmothers at that time, that would have been, the same as if I was able to, just sort of like pound a pop song on a piano. Like that wouldn't necessarily have told them that I was a musical child. And so I think it took them a while to see that there was some real aptitude there. And then they started sending me Bach. And I remember getting the Bach double from my grandma Celia, who lived in Wyoming. She sent me a music -1 of the Bach double. And so that was the first time I tried to play Bach violin music on the mandolins. Oh wait, you know what? That's not totally true. There was this bluegrass fiddler, Richard Green, who had me playing in his band when I was 10, and he wanted to work up a version of the third movement of just a really countrified version of the third movement of the Bach E major violin concerto. And so I had to learn it, and I learned it by ear, at 10. And he was like, no, you're missing some stuff. And so then My mom sat me down with a part. I forget where she even got a part. I think I tabbed it out, like kind of note by note. So this is E, that's this one, that's the second fret on the D string. So I'm thinking of it that way.
Wow.
So there was a little moment there, but I had no interest in it. It was just something I had to do because this guy wanted me to do it in his band. So it was my own love of Bach was kindled by my grandmothers on my mom's side, and it was. So grandma sent me that. She sent me Yo-Yo's recording of the cello suites. She sent me an old Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra recording of the Brandenburg concertos. I remember particularly going nuts for the third movement of the fifth Brandenburg concerto. Which kind of sounded like fiddle tune music to me. And then my step-grandmother, we were visiting. For some reason, she sat me down with Gould's second recording of the Goldberg Variations. I think Gould's, the sort of metronomic approach that Gould takes in that recording. I mean, think about the way he plays that first variation. So she plays me the opening theme, and I'm going, okay, fine. And then he kicks into that first variation, and it's so, almost militant in a way that struck a major chord for me as a bluegrass player where, this like, it's right here, and it has been right here your whole life. That's and actually bluegrass music sort of pretends to be that, but it's actually rushing all the. I think if you don't end at least 5 BPM up from where you started, then you have been out of the pocket, my friend. Which I didn't realize until much later. Gould's rhythmic approach on that second recording to the Goldbergs kind of blew the doors off for me and made me realize, no, this is for you too. Is up to that point, I had always felt like I was on quicksand rhythmically when I would try to engage with classical music and just go like, I can't move to it. I don't know what to do. I can't move to it. And I could move to Gould. And now, of course, there are infinite ways to skin the rhythmic cat. But at that point, I needed something that was, a sledgehammer, where the pulse was being hammered into your skull. And so that Gould, the first variation was Gould's performance of the first variation was like, that was the dynamite I needed to stick under this massive wall I had built between myself and classical music.
It's funny that you talk about ending 5 BPMs faster with bluegrass music, because actually you've been described as a musician whose inner metronome never breaks. And I want to talk about practice, actually. Do you practice with a metronome? I
love practicing with a metronome, but kind of just to know what quote unquote perfect is, but not to, not with a metronomic sense of timing being the goal, but rather just to be able to do that, to just kind of know where it is and be able to, I imagine rhythm as, I see like a grid in my head, and there's like these little, how to explain what I'm seeing. It's like when I first saw a Logic session, like that program Logic. When I first saw a Logic session, I was like, that's almost like what I see in my head when I'm hearing people play, and just imagining the placement as these little blocks on this grid. And it helps me figure out what might be the most beautiful placement that I could contribute. Like I see these little blocks laid out on a grid as music is happening in real time, and you can predict kind of the next beat is going to be another frame of this grid, and you can make predictive placement decisions based on the last snapshot that you've collected. because of course you can't place to what you're hearing. It's too late already. It's like if the quarterback threw the football to where the receiver was. Or like, yeah, if the quarterback throws the ball to where he sees the receiver at that moment, there's no hope of a completion. And so we as musicians, when we're playing with other people, that's what we're doing. We're listening to what's there, but it's only useful to us in terms of what's coming. So in terms of how it's going to predict what's about to happen, and then we can place accordingly.
I'm always interested in the first notes that musicians play when they pick up the instrument the first time in the day. So can you take us through maybe your morning? You're drinking coffee right now. Is this an everyday thing? Tell us about the morning.
The morning, so when I pick up, there's coffee, and there's sort of a fearful assessment of what I'm supposed to get done. As opposed to what I would love to do, which is probably left to my own devices. I'm just sort of puttering around musically. Often with the mandolin in my hands, as much as I would love to, just sort of live in like a quiet, thinking musical wonderland. I do think a little more clearly with the mandolin in my hand. It's just like some conductors want a baton and some don't. And for me, the mandolin helps. I think I've gotten to the point where I can refrain from letting it direct my thoughts. And instead I can, my thoughts can direct it. But I mean, for the longest time, I was absolutely like an instrument-driven musical thinker. I'd like to think it's gotten a little freer than that. But
when did you make that switch from from the mandolin driving you to the other way around?
It was certainly a thing that Edgar was talking about as an ideal. And then the more I started fanboying composers, the more I would read in their writings, it's better to compose off the piano. Make sure you're composing enough away from the instrument. And when I started doing that, I realized the extent to which I was confining myself thinking exclusively on the instrument, especially as esoteric an instrument as the mandolin. The piano or just keyboard in general is so much purer in terms of it just seems like there's less between you and music if you're a pianist, which I envy.
So is tuning the first thing you do when you pick up the mandolin?
No, almost always just a little bit in D major.
Almost always a little bit in D major.
Almost always. It's the smack in the middle of the instrument. It's so it's like your open strings go G, D, A, E, just like a violin. And so D and A are right smack in the middle of the instrument. And so I feel like almost always I hit a G chord that is functioning as a 4 in my mind. And then I just end up in D. And that lets me know where the axe is. Then I start tuning. It's a centering, it's a calibration device. And it's almost always something sort of in a vaguely, British Isles fiddle tune language. It's just, that's true north for me. And so I just hit the calibration device and then get to work.
So assuming that there's someone listening who doesn't know what a mandolin is, what is this?
Right.
What is this thing we're talking about?
Oh, it's a toy. It's a little toy instrument that is tuned the same as a violin. It's very quiet. Plucking a string, as any violinist knows, is not the best way to get sound out of these wooden boxes of ours. They're typically in 8 strings and 4 courses, G, D, A, E. The G is the G below middle C, and that's as low as it's going to get. They're fretted, and then when you get to the extreme high end of the range, there's even less sustain, and they're fairly unwieldy up there. And not that it can't be navigated, but it gets even more toy-like up there. I think it's I don't know about you. I think it's productive to dwell on an instrument's deficiencies, to remind yourself not to live for an instrument, but rather to live for music, and know that I don't particularly love my speaking voice either, but it'll get the job done.
Well, what does it do having two strings per note? Does it make it twice as loud? What does this do? Why are there two strings per note? Are they the same density? What's going on there?
Right. I mean, I think it increases the harmonic complexity of any single note. You're never going to get them in perfect unison, and so it's just a way to liven up the harmonic series. If you are familiar with the mandolin, you might be thinking of that kind of sort of gondola. The tremolo thing, that's very easy on a mandolin because of that double string. As you go, like when your pick stroke goes through the string, that means you're closer. You're going to be closer to the upstroke. So if a downstroke, if you had to go all the way back to that first string, it's just the amount. Your wrist doesn't want to make quite as small of a motion. So if you only had the one string there as a plucked instrument player, imagine your wrist dropping a certain amount that's natural. When you raise it up, that same amount, if you only have one string, there's just more distance before you're going to hit that string. Whereas if there's two there, you drop your wrist a natural amount, your pick is resting just below that bottom string. And so you're going to hit it sooner when you then move your wrist up. And so it's easy. Arguably, it's, maybe it's just a little faster.
In tuning these unisons, a lot of players don't get to tune unisons. And in my limited tuning experience, I've always felt that actually tuning unisons is kind of the most profound tuning experience. Do you agree, or do you think that tuning unisons gives maybe your ear something that the ear of someone who doesn't tune unisons doesn't have?
Oh, maybe. I hadn't thought of that. I'm also, by the way, I'm the son of a piano technician.
Okay.
Talk about tuning unisons. So I heard a lot of that happening, even before I became a mandolin player. I hadn't thought about that. I love it. I mean, there is a unique satisfaction derived from getting that thing zinging, getting it right in there as close as you possibly can, as close as the ear allows, like a satisfaction akin to popping bubble wrap, or like squishing packing peanuts, or I don't know. There's it is very there's something very, very satisfying about it.
Bach's music always seems to be some of the hardest to execute, no matter what instrument you're playing it on. Is that true on mandolin?
Sure. Yeah, oh God, I mean, I'm thinking right now about getting the C major fugue up and running, for like the third time, still having never performed it. Just kind of like, I keep getting it close to the place where I could imagine performing it, and then some other big project comes up, and I let it kind of accumulate dust in the corner, and then have to trot it back out, dust it off. I'm far more scared of that piece than I am like the Chaconne, for instance. Yeah, there's nothing more demanding, but I think it's more. Isn't it more? I feel like it's more mental than physical, actually.
The C major?
With Bach, well, just with Bach in general, that there's something relentless about the musical thought. And because of his command of his materials, the heart and soul being in his manipulation of his material. Like if you let your guard down for a split second, you'll shoot yourself into a part of the piece that's 6 minutes away from where you are right now. And so I think it demands your full presence in the moment. You have to be so firmly committed to the moment that you're right inside of, and you have to be fully committed and present in the sum of all of those moments. That's why I find it to be among the most difficult to. But isn't it also, though, that we love it so much? We love it so much that that we get a little bit worked up every time we're going to do it, and we just want to do right by the master. With Bach, I am always imagining that he's out there listening somehow.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, I have these moments in almost every piece, and you probably have the same moments. I don't exactly know the voicing in the C major fugue, but it's the one that goes, and then it's like it's this amazing moment that cadences in E minor, and I think it's right before maybe the big. And
Yes!
I get so nervous every time that I psych myself out, like every time, and I have those moments. And
Oh, absolutely, no, absolutely. And you just want it. You want it to be good for our boy, and that so many people have played it before us. There's a lot of examples of it being done so well, and I think any good musician has has imposter syndrome or complex or whatever it is. Like, do I deserve to be interacting with this music? And, is my next performance of it going to finally hit people to the fraud that I am?
yeah, yeah. Well, it's an air of humility in front of this man and in front of this tradition, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna get personal, if you don't mind, just for the
Please.
end of the interview here. Can we talk about the cover of your first album leading off? There's this boy I have a really hard time believing is you, and then is it a baseball diamond on the cover?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And is this because your great 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 uncle was a 19th century baseball Hall of Famer? What's up?
Unbelievable that you know that. Yeah. Yes. I am a huge baseball fan. And indeed, exactly four greats of an uncle of mine played for the Philadelphia Athletics and the Detroit Wolverines in the late 1800s, and then came out of retirement in the very early 1900s to play alongside Ty Cobb, actually. But he's in the Hall of Fame. He was a member of the only all 400 hitting outfield in 1896. Dude has a lifetime. Oh God, I think 331 average, if memory serves. He still holds the record for career RBIs per game percentage. He at .923, 1 percentage point higher than Lou Gehrig, and for the longest time held the single season RBI mark at 166 or 165, and then Hack Wilson eventually broke it with like 190, which I think still stands. But yeah, he was a great ball player. And my grandpa on my dad's side, that's actually on my mom's side, where all the Bach loving pianists are, also this random baseball player. But then on my dad's side, my grandpa was a great ball player and was recruited heavily out of high school. His parents didn't let him go into the minors out of high school. They made him finish college first, but then he was recruited again out of college. Made it to the Dodgers AAA farm team but he was an All-American in college as well, but made it to the Dodgers AAA team before he decided that he was going to go into speech pathology. But baseball is a big part of the family.
Well, I have a book to recommend to you by Russel Sherman, the pianist who teaches at New England Conservatory, or taught. I don't know if he's still teaching, but it's a book called Piano Pieces, and it's reflections on what it is to be a musician and how to play piano, and at least half of these small paragraphs, which are like poetic musings, are baseball and music analogies.
What? Okay, I need this.
How many suits do you own, Chris Thile?
Suits? Ooh, less. Less now. Less now. In the last year, my wife made me throw out a bunch of the ones that I haven't worn in 5 years or more, or had been worn on stage too many times to be in a closet with other garments. If you know what I mean. There's just, we sweat those performances, don't we? When we're imagining Bach listening to us, sometimes that manifests itself in an extra degree of sweat, renders a garment unwearable. But I have such a hard time throwing these things away and feel like, oh, maybe there's some dry cleaner out there that's gonna make it okay, but there never is. So I just threw away a bunch. I probably, at this point, Yeah, we're probably way down, 6, 7, something like that.
Okay. I was not expecting a single digit.
No, it wouldn't have been for many years. I also move around a lot on stage, kind of by accident, and that is also, in addition to Bach-based anxiety, is hard on Suits.
Bach-based anxiety, yeah, I think that's a whole...
So I wonder if he did ever, you know?
You wonder what?
I wonder if he ever did.
If he had Bach-based anxiety, well, yeah, he was part of the tradition. He apparently was sitting on his uncle's lap as his uncle was improvising on the organ in fluent 5-part harmony. So I assume there's, even within the Bachs.
He would have been sometimes holding himself up and finding himself unworthy.
Finish the quote. What an amazing moment. What an amazing
donut. How do you know about that?
You're Chris Thile. We have to know these things.
Amazing. So good.
I want to talk about drinking, actually.
A favorite pastime of mine.
Can you tell us about pure pot still, plumber and wetter burn bottled at Navy strength?
Wow. That sounds delicious right now. Are we talking, is that what Smith & Cross is?
That's the one.
All right. Bam. Oh, and it makes such a good Negroni. Have you done that?
Okay, no, I haven't done that, and that's one thing we have in common is that's definitely one of my favorite cocktails. So you make Negronis with this Jamaican rum?
With Smith & Cross instead of gin. And particularly with Smith & Cross. Although I have a bartending hero who makes a rum Negroni with Ray and Nephew overproof rum, and it's delicious. And occasionally I'll mess around using like an ounce of an aged Jamaican rum, like maybe Appleton 12, and so that being a half ounce, and then the other half ounce coming from like a Martinique rum agricole. Could be really that also makes a fun Negroni. But right now I'm obsessed with just straight up replacing the gin with an ounce of Smith & Cross.
Do you bottle your own Negronis?
I don't. I should because one of my favorite Negronis in New York at Marta, what neighborhood? It's just south of Midtown. At Marta, they do a bottle conditioned Negroni that I think is one of the finest in the city. And I do feel like these bottle aged or barrel aged cocktails only make sense if you're using an unaged spirit. And so a Negroni, like a traditional gin based Negroni, makes sense to bottle age as opposed to a Manhattan where where the base spirit is already aged. Like you're not gonna taste like a couple months of barrel age in a drink that is predominantly aged 7 years already, But I do actually really love a bottle or barrel aged Negroni. I have not tried that with Smith & Cross. Smith & Cross is aged, but not much, right? It's probably in the 3-year zone. Maybe it's introducing a certain... It's like a bottle-aged Negroni in a way because of that extra age that Smith & Cross has, as opposed to Plymouth Gin being in its infancy.
A few questions from Instagram. The first is from Kevin, who asks... Is the first song on the Goat Rodeo sessions named after Sam Ross's bar? And if so, do the other members know this?
Yes, and yes. It is absolutely named after Attaboy at 134 Eldridge Street, where I feel like I came of age.
Okay.
That bar, before it was Attaboy, was called Milk and Honey. Just one of the greatest cocktail bars in the history of cocktail bars. And so as they were, the Goats and I wrote that song as the transition from Milk and Honey at 134 to Attaboy was in process. And they told me they'd come up for that name, and I loved it. And I'm buddies with Sam and Mickey. And they told me, I think we finally have the name, Attaboy. What do you think? It's like, I love it. And then when the Goats and I wrote this thing that was sort of vaguely Irish sounding, and Mickey, aka Michael McElroy, who's partners with Sam Ross, in Attaboy, he's Irish, and so I pitched it. We're always struggling to name those Goat Rodeo songs.
Bethany asks, certain songs of yours, for example, Familiarity, You Are, they seem as if the forms are made with your intuition rather than based on a set form. Is that inspired at all by the wandering nature of Bach's preludes?
Totally.
Totally.
I love the improvisatory aspects of the preludes. But obviously, he's dotting his I's and crossing his T's formally as well. You know, it isn't slipshod in any way. But there is that, you do feel like you're getting to hear him riff and just follow his nose. You know, I feel like we get to hear him follow his nose in the preludes, and I love doing that. I think that I come from a music that's very, where the creative process is almost exclusively improvisatory, and so even the preludes are comparatively very formally rigorous. But like, I mean, I've got something like the E major prelude is a huge compositional influence on me. Like, so the way he teases out that theme, the way he starts. I mean, God, the opening theme, he never goes back to it.
Yeah, I've always been struck that those are the only eighth notes in the composition are, and then and then it's a composition of and then you have the cadence.
Yeah, exactly at the very end, and other than that, he's not going to stop for nothing. It's the same, virtually the same in the D minor Giga. That the only eighth notes in that are also at the top of each half, and otherwise it never stops. Yeah, no, absolutely, it's well observed.
The Guru asks, "Where's Volume 2 at?"
It's in the practice room, baby. Yeah. That C major fugue is one of the that, you know, round 3 of dusting that thing off and trying to get it into performable shape is part of Volume 2 slowly manifesting.
And I want to add on to that question by asking, do you plan on recording the sonatas for violin and harpsichord?
I would love. There's a lot of them that would make a ton of sense. They wouldn't. I don't necessarily think that they would make. I gotta get in there with the slow movements and see if there's a way to make that really work. It depends on what we do with the keyboard parts. So I haven't thought about that. Volume 2 first, and then perhaps.
What would you do? I'm just because you made me think about this. You have the beginning, that B minor, and then the first entrance of the violin part is this long sustained F sharp. How would you do that? Would you tremolo? Would you trill? Would you just play it?
That's exactly the kind of thing that gives me pause.
Right.
And thankfully there are not moments like that in the solo violin music. There are plenty of moments where I wish I had more sustain, but not something like that. And tremolo I've played the second movement of the Bach double with orchestra a couple times, and obviously a great violinist. And so that's, you know, when you're talking about da 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 da. That's already a bit harrowing on the mandolin, and like I don't want to sit there and again gondolify it. You know, that's just going to make everyone want to die. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't think I would trill. Like when I've read something like that, I I just play it, and it vanishes, and we have to hear it in our inner ear. And like, how audibly can you intend a note like that on on a mandolin? It's kind of the question, like, how audible can you make your intentions for that note as opposed to the reality of that note? Or I would maybe improvise, embellish. That would be those would be the only two viable options to me. Could I improvise something, that didn't seem out of character, that didn't seem self-indulgent in any way? I mean, my quick hypothesis is no.
It's been a real pleasure having you here. Thanks for being with us. And
oh my God, the pleasure's all mine, Evan. Thank you so much. What a joy.
Can you answer these last two questions? What is the one book you've read more than any other? And if you were recommending a book, is it the same one?
That is interesting. Absolutely. If I was only recommending one book, though, I don't know. But as far as the book that I've read more than any other, it is absolutely the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. Not that any of you haven't read it, and would it be the thing, like, if someone hadn't read it, would I recommend? Yeah, I probably would. I don't think anything has done more for my imagination, and I don't think anything has done more for me than my imagination.
There's a sister question, too, with it. The fiddle tune you've played the most, and if you had to recommend someone to learn a fiddle tune, would it be the same one?
Probably so. St. Anne's Reel. St. Anne's. It's just so perfect. It's just a little morsel, little petit four of musical perfection. I smile even just thinking about it. The B part is so yearningly beautiful. I never get bored of St. Anne's. I play it to the day I die.
Chris, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for yours. I'm glad we finally did this. Can't wait till the next one. Count me in, whatever you got.
You're in.
All right, mighty fine.
Mighty fine, said the man. Thank you for listening. Thank you to Eddie Barbash. Thank you to Armand Hirsch. And thank you to Sarah Jaros for helping organize this interview. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
You are listening to the W.T.F. Bach podcast. Do you want a specific piece of Bach analyzed by Evan? You can write to us. Do you want to partner with us? Write us at the W.T.F. Bach podcast. Help keep this podcast alive. Support us. Send us a donation on Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal at WTF. You can support Evan at patreon.com/WTFBach. Your support is tax deductible. Evan Shinners is the founder of Nickle Incorporated, a 501c3 nonprofit which performs classical music in atypical venues. www.wtf. Thank you for listening.